I read a story a few years ago about an incident that happened out in Texas. It seems that there was a church sort of out in a rural area, or just outside of town, that had been there for a very long time, and the land across the road from them had recently sold. And they soon discovered that what was planned for that land was a bar. And no telling what else was going to go in that bar, but the church got upset about that. They didn't want that right across the road from them. Now, I'm sure they must have been Baptists rather than Methodists, because Methodists wouldn't have griped at all, would they? They put it there, and so on the sign, the church said, we're calling upon all our members in our community to pray. Let's keep this from happening. And so apparently there for weeks and weeks and weeks, they prayed as the bar across the road was being built. And right as it was near completion, lightning struck it and burned it to the ground. The bar owner sued the church on the grounds that they caused the destruction of his property, which the church denied. And in court, when the judge was trying to figure things out, he said to them, "Now this puts me in a unique situation. I have a bar owner who does believe in the power of prayer and the church that doesn't." Sometimes we have trouble having faith, don't we? We really do. Faith is hard to come by sometimes. We say we believe, but we don't always. We say we trust, but we don't always. We can't let go of things. Let God have them. The disciples were just like that. You know, in Mark's gospel, I've said many times, Mark's telling a story. And if you read Mark's gospel really, really close, what you'll notice is that disease submits to its creator. You'll notice that the demonic submits to its creator. You'll notice in this story that even nature must submit to its creator. But the disciples don't understand. Everything that is of this world, whatever power it might be, had to submit to the authority of Jesus. You see that time and time again in the Gospels. And time again, you see the disciples say, "How'd he do that? We don't understand. Who is this guy?" No matter how often he had told them, no matter how much he taught them, they never got clued in. They didn't understand. And so at the end of the parable, they say to one another, "Who is this guy that even the sea and the winds or storms obey him?" They never understood. And I think that's true of us too sometimes, that while we have faith and we believe that Jesus was the Son of God, that he came and provides a way for us to have salvation, sometimes we have a problem with really trusting that. Really believing that. Really believing, just like the disciples, we have trouble. Why? Because we can't let go of things. We can't let go of our troubles and all of that and let God take care of them. That was the lesson the disciples needed to learn. So we have to ask yourself the question, why did Mark include this story? Because remember, Mark was writing this story, his gospel account, down years after Easter. And he included things for a reason. He included stories that he included for a purpose. What was he trying to say to the early Christian church that was reading and hearing his gospel? Well, the first thing, of course, is that there should be no doubt that Jesus is Lord. There should be no doubt that Jesus is Lord. And I doubt any of them really had doubts about that. That they believed that Jesus had power over nature. That they believed that Jesus could do miraculous things. They believed that Jesus could even do things that would stupefy us, like the raising of Lazarus. They didn't have any problem with that kind of objective belief, where they believed the stories of Jesus. Where they had trouble was from the inside, their own spirit. They had trouble trusting Jesus. And I think that's why Mark included the story. It's there for a reason. You see, it's true that Jesus can command nature, but we don't always believe that Jesus can really be in charge of my life, and your life. We want to hold back and keep control. We don't want to let it go and turn it over to God. Why? Because we're afraid. We're afraid of what might happen if we don't stay in control of it. We're afraid of what might come to pass if we let go of it. But the lesson that Mark is trying to teach us is that you got to let go if you really want to trust Jesus. So it can be an analogy for us to look at the Christian faith and learn from it, just as the disciples learned when they witnessed it. See, not only are there physical storms, there are also spiritual ones. And sometimes we face a lot of those, don't we? We have to face what seems to be one threat after another, one potential calamity after another. We get afraid facing our future because we don't know what it's going to bring. And so what we tend to do is to try to get everything gathered together in our own minds and figure it all out for ourselves. We want to be able to know with some certainty that our next steps are going to be these. And it doesn't work that way. How many times have your plans been frustrated? How many times have the things that you thought were going to happen didn't happen? How many times have you been anxious about a moment that's coming up in life and that moment never came? Why? Because we're not in control. We never have been. But that's the illusion. The illusion is that we ultimately have some say in what comes to pass in our lives. And we do have some, but it's minimal. But we can't change anything ultimately. We can't alter what's coming down the path by worrying about it. And so Mark included this story as a teaching example that you don't have to be afraid. You shouldn't be afraid. Why? Because God's in control. Now, that might not mean that you're going to get everything to turn out like you want it to. That doesn't mean that if you sit down and you plan that X, Y, and Z are going to happen at this time and another time, that doesn't mean it's going to happen that way. Nor does the story mean that we should give up on planning. We ought to plan. If you want to be a doctor, you have to prepare to be a doctor. If you want to be a lawyer, you have to prepare to be a lawyer. That's true of almost anything. You have to learn a trade in order to be able to use that as your vocation. So it's not about just letting go of your life and saying, come what may, will happen. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about trust. Do you trust God enough to believe that God has your back? That Jesus is who he says he is. And that he's watching out for you. Do you remember in the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus was talking to those who are listening, and he said, why do you worry about so many things? The things you worry about. But why are you worrying about what you're going to eat tomorrow? Why are you worrying about what you're going to wear? Why are you worrying about all of these things? Just seek me and my kingdom first, and everything will be okay. Now, I don't want to tell you something false, that just because you trust in Jesus, that doesn't mean that everything's going to turn out rosy for you all the time. We're not in control of that. Sometimes things just happen. But the promise is that when we go through that, whatever it is that we're going through, Jesus is with us. And we don't have to be afraid. That's the lesson of this story. Jesus is asleep. And the waves are crashing upon the boat, and the disciples are afraid it's about to sink. Now, I don't know if you know anything about the Sea of Galilee. It's not really a sea, it's a big lake. It's about 13 miles long and 8 miles wide at its widest. And I can relate to what's going on because years ago, when I still lived in Mississippi, I would take my boat from time to time out on Sardis Lake. I don't know if any of you know where that is, but it's in North Mississippi. It's a pretty good-sized lake, probably bigger than the Sea of Galilee in length. And I can remember a few times getting out there and going to a place where fishing was going to happen, and all of a sudden, you see a storm coming. It comes quick. And then having to travel back from where you are back to the dock, which could be 7 or 8 miles, going pretty slow, and those waves hitting you and the boat rocking back and forth, and sometimes you wonder, is it going to capsize? That's where the disciples were. But they were out on this Sea of Galilee. That's where they fished. That's how they made their living. And from what I've been told, the unique geography of the Sea of Galilee is that you can enter the boat with clear skies, and then 10 minutes later there'd be a fierce storm. It can happen that fast. And these boats weren't like ships. These were relatively small boats, fishing boats. And so they're out there, and the storm comes up suddenly while Jesus is asleep. And one, they can't stand that Jesus can still be asleep in the middle of that. How could he? Because he was calm. He was at peace. And so they wake him up and they say, we're dying up here. Are you just going to let us drown? And Jesus spoke to the waves and the wind and said, be still. Now, if God can control in Jesus nature like that, if God can empower Jesus to go to a demoniac and say, leave him, let him go, and if God can, through Jesus, raise the dead, think about what he can do for you. He can make you unafraid. You see, here's the catch. You've got to let go. You got to surrender. You've got to be willing to surrender everything about yourself to him. Now, I'm not saying that you don't bear responsibility for things that happen. You do. You have to keep doing things in life to care for yourself and work in order to provide food for yourself and all those kind of things. I'm talking about when those really, really hard times come. When you're not sure if you're going to be able to make it through tomorrow. When you're not sure that things are going to turn out and you expect them not to, you expect the worst. Those are the times when you let go. And let Jesus say, to whatever your storm might be, peace be still. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.